Good morning and welcome to you all on Palm Sunday and this beautiful spring Sunday. For those of you who don't know us, my name is Catherine Van Houten and this is my husband Peter. And it's our joy to share Sunday service with all of you, some of you who have been here as guests this past weekend for programs at the Expanding Light. Some of you are continuing in the yoga teacher training course, and some of you we know have come from different parts of Nevada County for Sunday service with us this morning. So welcome. It's our joy to share it with you. Our Palm Sunday reading is entitled, "Who is this Son of Man?" And these are commentaries on parallel passages from the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. On Palm Sunday, the throng joyfully acclaimed Jesus Christ as he entered Jerusalem, casting palm fronds before him and singing, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. The Lord bless the King of Israel." Jesus Christ had told the people, "The Son of Man must be lifted up." His reference, so we are told, was to the mode of his impending crucifixion. Some persons on that occasion had asked, "Who is this Son of Man?" Was Jesus a human being merely? Those who, on Palm Sunday, called him King, little realized the actual nature of his kingdom. He was far more than what they imagined. Yes, of course, he ate, drank, walked, slept, and talked like others. His consciousness, however, was centered in infinity. Yes, again, he laughed like others, but his laughter expressed divine joy, not mere merriment. Again, he wept like them, but never with human grief. The tears he shed were for the sufferings of unenlightened human beings. Never were they shed in self-pity. Jesus Christ was wakeful in God. Most people, by contrast, are asleep spiritually. How strange to reflect that less than a week from that entry into Jerusalem, so joyfully acclaimed, he would be arrested, condemned, and crucified. Such is the bittersweetness of human existence. Smiles of welcome one day, insults, even persecution the next. How few realize that Christ's sufferings would not be for himself, but for people's ignorance, for those who had not yet understood the deeper reality that dwelt also in them. Everyone is born trailing clouds of glory, as the poet Wordsworth put it. Even the meanest beggar has lived a story, or will eventually have lived it, more magnificent than the greatest epic ever written. In the Bhagavad Gita, this dichotomy between the Son of Man and the inner Son of God is beautifully described. Sri Krishna, representing God in human form, reveals his true nature in infinity. In the 11th chapter of that great scripture, his chief disciple Arjuna exclaims, "O infinite light, thy radiance spreading o'er the universe shines into the very darkest abyss. Thy voice o'erwhelms the roar of cosmic cataclysms. Lo, the myriad stars are thy diadem. Thy scepter radiates power everywhere. O immortal Brahma, Lord of all, again and again at thy feet of infinity, I lie in prostration before thee. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
This reading is from Whispers from Eternity. This is Yogananda's book of mystical poetry. Divine Mother, be thou the only flame shining on the altar of our hearts. Burn away any darkness that lurks there. Divine Mother, be thou the only fragrance rising with the incense of our love for thee. Permeate any dark nook in the hearts also of those who we love. In our tears of love for thee, wash away what attraction we feel for material objects. In our tears of communion with thee, wash away all sorrows of earth forevermore. I was thinking this morning what a remarkable challenge we have in front of us. For us as devotees, really striving not simply to become Christ-like, but to become Christs in this process of attaining God realization. You know, it's a curious thing. I remember back from my childhood, I often wondered that it seemed remarkable to me that people, when they joined a church, felt as though, well, as long as I've joined a church, then I'm sort of done. That religious realization was sort of like joining a fraternity or a political club, that you could, with equal vigor, say, I'm a Republican, or I belong to the Green Party, or I'm a Methodist, and somehow once you've said that, you're done. There's nothing else that you have to do for your development. In fact, this is a tremendous and difficult process that we've engaged in to become Christs, yogi Christs. It's in fact the hardest process that any human being can go through. In fact, it's the one thing that we know from what the saints have said at the end of their lives that uniformly yields happiness, that yields an unalloyed joy. The fact is that this process of God realization asks us to remove from our hearts all the impediments that we have that separate us from God. Everything in our heart that makes it so we're not pure enough to perceive God directly. Even those last small things that separate us from God have to be washed away. The truth is, it doesn't happen in a linear or even fashion. In fact, the way you can think about it, our spiritual development looks a little bit more like a wave rushing onto a beach, that there are parts of the wave that arrive early and wash way up the beach, but there's parts of the wave that sort of hold back and maybe don't come as far up. I know I've often thought it's, we're all faced as we grow spiritually with what you can think of as our spiritual stragglers, those parts of ourselves that somehow have become a little left behind. And it's hard for us as devotees when we recognize that there are parts of ourselves that are still separating us from God. And in some way, maybe there's things that have been really left behind and are now quite painful because we're faced with dealing with them when we didn't even realize they were there. I was thinking when I was a child, we often, at our school, we'd go on field trips to museums, and the sort of classic thing that would happen would be that we were all told to be back at the bus at 4 o'clock, and dutifully, almost all of us would show up at 4 o'clock, and we'd be all sitting on the bus waiting to leave. And there were 40 of us on the bus, or however many went on the trip, and there'd always be 2 or 3 people that weren't there. And so we were all ready to go. We were all done with the museum. It was time to go home. We were all impatient. And yet the teachers had to go back and search the entire museum to find the 2 or 3 students that were sort of straggling back in there. And invariably, it took them a half an hour to be found. And by the time they would be sort of marched onto the bus with the rest of us, there was sort of this clapping that they'd finally showed up, but not a little of, here you made us all wait a half an hour, and we were here right on time. Well, I think the truth is for all of us that there's that same process with us having parts of ourselves, parts of our character, parts of our temperament that in fact are stragglers. And it's difficult to understand sometimes why, when we feel in other areas that we've made very good progress, that we still have parts of ourselves that are lagging far behind. I know the way Swami Kriyananda has often talked about it is it's a little bit thinking of an army advancing across a battlefield, which I actually think in some ways is a good image for devotees, because we really are battling the things in ourselves that are really most difficult to overcome. In fact, I'd have to say that being a devotee and seriously wanting to become Christ-like, to want God realization, it's not for sissies. It's not for weaklings. This is a very difficult process to go through. But as an army advances across a battlefield, there'll be portions of the army that lag behind, that straggle behind. And yet, every portion of the army eventually has to get to the other side to be victorious. Well, what do these spiritual stragglers look like? And I think these are the sorts of things that we can all see aspects of ourselves in. And I think, if you ask devotees that are sincere and are trying to meditate regularly and trying to ask God to change them, to help them see the things in themselves that they need to change on a daily basis, and grow with the thought of reunification with God. What they want is a purity of heart where that last veil of separation with God has finally been whisked away, to where there's a reunification of our heart with the infinite heart. And what you'll see from people, these kind of stragglers can look like a desire for recognition. Maybe it's just from the people you work with, or the people that you're closest to, just a feeling that they appreciate who you are and what you do for them. That a wish for maybe you could be just a little more financially comfortable, or maybe a little healthier, or just a little more of the things that make life on a physical level work more easily. Or maybe it's a certain kind of human relationship that's easier or more satisfying than you currently have. Or maybe you have a tendency to be sloppy about your spiritual practices and not really pay attention when you're supposed to be meditating, or cutting your meditation short, or just you're tired at the end of the day and decide, well, I've done enough for God today, and so tonight I won't meditate. Or we're simply just being too busy and we forget about God. And we realize maybe a day has gone by and we haven't thought that the reason that we're here is for God realization, to reunify ourselves with God, not just to be busy for God. We've been so caught up in the busyness of service that, and I think for many of us, we have areas of service, we have families that demand our love and attention, we have friends that need us. It's easy to get into this thought that there's so much to do that we've forgotten the most important thing, which is to be doing those things with the thought of God and the thought of serving God. I actually thought this morning it would be sort of interesting. What happens if we lined up 100 saints who are close to being completely realized and asked them, what are your stragglers? What are the things that are the last little holdouts for you? And we ask them, please tell us because we'd like to know, because this will be helpful for others. What sorts of things would they say to us? And I think the sorts of things we would hear is, you know, sometimes I feel like the spiritual path feels rather plodding, and I go through dry periods where I wonder if this is really working at all for me. I mean, I feel like I've made progress, but I can't feel a connection with God. And sometimes that will go on for long periods, weeks or months or even years before I feel that there's some awakening in my heart again. Or they'll say that they feel somewhat unappreciated on a human level from those that maybe they've tried the hardest to help, the people that they've worked the hardest to really be a channel for God, maybe aren't reflecting back to them any kind of appreciation or thanks. And there's a part of their human heart that can still feel that. They know they did the service for God. They've tried to do it with a sense of nishkam karma, desireless action, but still there's a little part of their heart that can feel as a human being that how nice it would have been if there was just a little bit of a response on a human level saying thanks. Or they may have realized that over their life they've been betrayed by people that they put their trust in, people that they offered real selfless friendship to, who've turned and actually turned on them and betrayed them. And there's still that little faint sense of a hurt that's there. Still, they know their reality, in fact, is in God. They're still moving forward, but there's still that little straggler of a hurt that they can feel. Or maybe they feel that it would be nice if once in a great while they had a friend they could really talk to, someone where they could talk meaningfully and deeply and not feel that there was this separation that you get in human relationships, particularly as a devotee where you're really trying to be more impersonal and not see your friendships as there just to have fun and enjoyment, but there as part of our process of God realization. Or they may feel that sometimes they're tired of feeling that in human relationships and in working with other people that so often they have to be the shock absorber. You'll often see this in very saintly people that somehow they are quite willing to take upon themselves in difficult situations to absorb the shock of a crisis to make everything work around them because others aren't strong enough to do that. So they will be willing to take that on, and yet they feel some pain having been that shock absorber many times. And I think most poignantly, they ask the question of, I have tried to love God so sincerely, why can't I feel God all the time? I sometimes feel that glimmer, that deep well of joy, but I get busy with service, my body is complaining. There's other things to attract my attention. Why do I lose that? Why can't I hold on to that sense of unification, that sense of realization of who I am as being an aspect of God rather than just this small human being? Well, I think that's a helpful exercise because it really shows us that for anyone on the spiritual path, even people that are truly at the end of this very long process, which takes countless lifetimes, that they have stragglers too. And when you actually talk to people about what is in their lives that is hurtful or harmful or things that they're holding on to that make it difficult for them to make progress, you'll hear a tremendous similarity or thread. It'll often have its own unique characters. I remember once years ago talking to a fellow who was trying to explain something that had been bad about the way he had been born that had created all this misfortune in his life, and it had ruined him when he was going through college, and it had felt he was in this perfect relationship, harmonious relationship, but he had this thing wrong with him, And it had ruined this sort of love of his life relationship. And he couldn't understand why God would hate him so much to do this. And I must admit, I was sort of listening, well, what could this be that it would be so all pervasive and so harmful? Because clearly he felt that this was kind of the key of what had ruined his life. And finally, when it came out, it was that he was left-handed. And I had to think about it for a minute. It's like, but I saw from his point of view that the stress that this had brought into his life, the way his life had played out, that it had actually sort of set him up for failure in all these different circumstances. And it was hard not to feel compassion for what he was feeling, even though when you looked at it rather superficially, you could say, well, get over it. Some of us have big feet or big noses, or, we're born men or women, and some of us are right or left-handed. Get over it. That was not the compassionate thing to say at that point. But frankly, and the reason I chose that is that I think all of us have our own little version of being left-handed, that where we think that, oh, well, if I had just had this different experience in my life, or if I'd just been born differently with different traits and different characteristics, things would have been easier or they would have been different. And the truth is, no, they wouldn't. I think for all of us, when we come into this lifetime, we know precisely what we're going to be dealing with. In fact, I have a strong feeling that before we come into a lifetime, when we're sincere devotees like this, where we're really here with a desire for God realization, where we're really saying as our underlying prayer, our true underlying prayer, Lord, please change me. I wish only to be different. I wish only to eliminate this final separation between us. If that's really our prayer, then when we come into a life like this, I think what we ask for, what are the experiences, what are the challenges that I must go through successfully to make that final separation disappear. And I think I can imagine Master sitting there with us saying, well, you will have to go through this very challenging thing, and it will be awful. It may make you feel insane. It may break your heart. It may make you feel that you're worthless, but the one thing I can offer you is I will be there with you and I will help you. Are you willing to go do this? And I think for those of us as real devotees, we say, well, of course. And then our memory gets erased. Like a science fiction movie or something. And here we're plunked down as human beings with no memory, and we have to learn a language, and we have to grow up and grow into bodies that feel very foreign and uncomfortable, and learn roles, go through education, have relationships with other people. And I think for most of us, it takes many, many years before we realize why we're here. It may take decades. In fact, if there's any reason to not want to reincarnate, it's when you realize how long it takes in any given lifetime to sort of be awake to the point that you want to be different, that you realize that there is a goal to life other than just the pettiness of most day-to-day lives. There are several things about this process of evolution that I think are helpful for all of us to remember as devotees. And I think the first one is that God is with us in this whole process. And no matter how painful an experience we have, whether we feel our heart's been broken, whether we feel that something that we felt was sort of key to our happiness as a human being has been snatched away from us, a chance to show that we've really accomplished something, even if it's something that we felt we were doing for God, if it's been snatched away from us at the last minute. These things are very painful on a human level. And I think even the greatest saints still feel these things when they occur. On some part, there's still some reverberation in their heart. And this is part of the process of development. I mean, if there wasn't some discomfort there, how easy it would be for us just not to change. But there's always this reminder that if there's still pain when I go through a difficult time in a human relationship, or I'm disappointed in how something has turned out that I've worked on for years, or I'm unappreciated for something that I've done, as long as there's that goad of pain, we know we're not free yet. And in fact, I've often thought that our karmic experiences in life, they almost come back to us almost like a planet circling the sun, that don't worry, if you haven't gotten a lesson when it comes around, don't worry, it'll be back. In fact, it will keep returning with some regularity, and it may be spaced out over decades, but it will come back, and you will recognize that, boy, this is the same thing coming back again. And how many times am I going to have to go through that before I get it right? And in fact, it will keep coming back, but at some point you will have figured it out and it won't affect you anymore. And you'll realize that, this has gotten me 2 or 3 times, but it's not going to get me this time, because I'm actually feeling free enough. I'm feeling big enough spiritually that this planetary return of karma will swing round, and this time it won't touch me. I'm free enough in God that it will come by, and yes, I'll know it's there. I can remember what it's like to have had this thing upset me or feel devastating, and yet it's come through, and this time I'm free. Remember that the meditation practice that we do, Kriya Yoga, it's actually based on the Sanskrit word to do. And Kriya works with us on the subtlest level to help refine our nervous system, refine our energetic nervous system, refine us in ways that allow us to release these final hurts, these pains, these things that separate us from God. And this is even if you feel like your kriyas aren't working, they in fact are changing you. In fact, it's what we understand now about the brain and central nervous system is the things that we are doing right now are determining what we will be in 6 months. I mean, this is just true in medicine, the way we counsel people. So this isn't something just spiritual. I mean, it's recognized in the neurosciences now that how you live your life, your behavior, the thoughts you have in your mind are going to determine where you are in 6 months. It's always been a little remarkable to me that back in the 1920s, when Yogananda would talk about meditation, he would tell people, if you meditate, it will change your brain. Well, you have to understand that up till 20 or 30 years ago, we thought your brain didn't change after about age 20. We now know that the brain and central nervous system are incredibly plastic, incredibly changeable. And the whole process of spiritual development involves a revolutionary change, an evolutionary change in our brain and central nervous system, and on subtler levels as well. So remember that our Kriya Yoga practice is a key part of that in changing us in ways, letting go of these tendencies that cause us pain. The other part, too, is that the rest of our lives count, too. In fact, I really think it's more helpful for us to think about when we call ourselves Kriya Yogis, or Kriya Bonds is the term we use, is that we're really not talking just about a meditation technique, we're talking about a lifestyle. And again, it goes back to our understanding that everything we're doing right now is going to determine who we are in 6 months or in a year. So every conversation that we have, every positive thought or negative thought that we have, every time we're kind to someone, that this is part of this process of refinement. And the sort of the exciting news in all this is God is really on our side in this. And that when we do the right thing in a difficult situation, that God is actually there refining us as we go through that, easing away these karmas. I've often thought that, in some ways it's very good we're not able to see the karmic burden that all of us have. It would probably be just horrifying beyond belief. And it's probably very good it's hidden from us to a great degree and only released in the batches or bits that we can really deal with or work with. And I think this is, when you think how many lifetimes it takes for someone to achieve God realization, it's not surprising there's quite a backlog of things. The great news is that God's there helping us with those things. And so I think as long as we continue to work with the spiritual path as an ongoing evolutionary process and realize that for all of us, and this includes the great saints, that there are going to be aspects of our personality, aspects of our temperament that act as stragglers. And if we find stragglers, well, that's actually a good thing. If we aren't aware of something, if we don't see something, there's no way we can bring it forward. There's no way we can work to purify that. If we just think everything is always okay, there's very little impetus to really want to be different or want to be better. So as Swami's often said to us, it's good when we find something about ourselves that needs changing to, in a sense, celebrate that. Here I found something that really needs to change, and God will give me the strength to change it. I've often found it's curious. It's often easy for people to think and worry about things outside themselves that they really can't affect and use that to replace any meaningful change in themselves. I mean, it's very easy to worry about something that's happening on the other side of the planet that you really can't affect, and maybe even be quite emotionally engaged in what's happening with that, and then not make any attempt to change yourself or work on yourself or be different. And so I think part of the message for all of us as devotees is to remember that this is a very intimate process that we're going through. This is one that we've all signed on for. We've asked for every single test we're going to get. In fact, probably we've known before the test comes that, in fact, it's coming. There's an interesting scientific study I read several years ago that this was actually done just with people guessing cards, whether a card was black or white. And as part of this study, they actually had their brains hooked up so that they could monitor the electrical processes in their brain. And one of the things that they found is after people had done this for a while, that when someone was about to guess a card correctly, their brain actually registered it before the card was shown. That there's some aspect of us, even in something as simple and mundane as guessing whether a card is red or black, that knows ahead of time what's going to happen. And I think so much more true for the happenings in our own lives, that in fact, when things come to us, both good or bad, that there's some part of us that knew ahead of time that those things were coming. And I think the more that we can feel that as things come into our life, whether we see them as malevolent or benevolent, that really these are all things that we've asked to be brought forward for us to help us in our own transformation. In the end, our goal isn't just to be Christ-like, it's to become a yogi Christ. And we've been given the tools to do this. If we can just remember that God's there to help us, we have the tools to make this transformation, and many, many men and women have become yogi Christs, have become truly spiritually reunified with God, using the tools and techniques that all of us are practicing. So I think that kind of the takeaway lesson for today is, as you go through your life, if you're finding things about yourself that you're a little surprised are still there, things that you're holding on to, we'll call them the spiritual stragglers. I think as Swami has told us, these are things worth celebrating. Realize that this is something that needs change. This is something that needs to be addressed, yes, but also remember that God's there with us. And God, without judgment, is there to help us and wants only for our reunification with Him.